I had a little surprise just now. I was talking to Kathy down here. I was expecting to get mic'd up, you know, the little Madonna mic like that. And she said, we can't use that today because there's something really cool about this one. Apparently embedded in here is some Google Translate technology which would allow me to speak New Zealand language and you're all going to understand it. So if at any point it stops working, just wave your hand and we'll figure something out. I'm talking about moving up market. Right now, just so I understand who's in the room, who's selling to enterprise today? So companies with a few thousand. You are, great, all right. And who thinks they would like to, but are not yet doing it? Okay, only a few, great, all right. So to give you some context, I think it's very important if your product extends to enterprise to think about doing it as early as possible. The other day, I was with a company who told me they had around 30,000 paying customers. They do a B2B product, selling to the business, and they're Series B, so relatively small company, around 10 million revenue, something like that. And I thought back to 2005 when I was at Salesforce.com. I used to be RVP for Enterprise in Australia, and I remember the numbers distinctly. We had 13,000, remember they had 30,000, we had 13,000, and we were doing 100 million in revenue. And that's because we went in enterprise early, and perhaps too early, if you are listening to the session next door, you need sometimes to get stretch customers, people that are only getting a little bit of value out of your product now, and if you build fast enough, you'll get them to where you want them to be, and sometimes you have to push like that. So I'm going to talk about my experience and tell you specifically how you need to be managing these organizations and the things that are different when you go to enterprise. So I've worked at all of these companies. My Oil of Olay routine might belie the fact that 22 years ago, I was working at Wang, for those of you who remember that, and I would have to get 3 deals a year to get my number. So I chased 10. Because if you're going to win 3 and they're really big, you have to focus. Then I went on to work for EDS, Electronic Data Systems. It was Ross Perot's company, if you can remember that company, bought by HP. I had to chase 3 deals a year to win 1. Sales cycle would be 12 or 18 months. Big swings, and if you miss, you're in all sorts of trouble. And then I went to Salesforce where it was 8, and so it got bigger. But finally, I ended up running global corporate sales for Yammer. And reps there would have to do around 30 deals a year to make their number. So you can imagine what I'm going to share with you, there's a lot of difference in running those organizations, how you manage the reps, and as a rep, how you think about managing your territory and your portfolio of opportunities. So let's talk about that. The first thing is, in terms of forecasting and managing your pipeline, if I'm a rep, what usually happens when you go enterprise is they like to go for the glory shots, the big hits, they knock it out of the park that's going to get them to quota. The trouble is, if you've got 1 deal to make your number and you miss the deal, you miss your number and you end up with a donut. So the coaching and the takeaway I'd like you to get from this slide is 80% of your quota in any period, be it a quarter or half a year, whatever your measurement period is, should come from your run rate business, which is deals of average sales cycle and average time, average amount, right? So if you miss one of those big deals that's going to knock you through to 120% and beyond, it doesn't matter. You can catch up in the next quarter. What I see time and time again is people who chase 2, 3 big deals, miss, 0, and they're fired. So that's the coaching I would give my reps. That's how I would analyze their portfolios and my one-on-ones and my monthly territory reviews to make sure that they've got that run rate set of base business. Second thing, does this look like a familiar one-on-one session you've ever had? Rainbows and unicorns, right? At enterprise level, we forecast deals, not monthly numbers. When I was running corporate sales in Yammer, what I would do is I'd look at close rate. So I could say that if you had 100 deals in a pipeline, our company close rate was it would get 30 deals closed. So it operated at that level. This is no longer appropriate at enterprise. At enterprise, we actually have to inspect at a deal level. Now, this is a screenshot from technology from Altify. It doesn't matter what technology you use, but the key takeaway here is we need to understand from our methodology, from our opportunity qualification and quality criteria, where do we stand at an individual deal level? So for a frontline manager, I'm no longer looking at reports saying, oh, you've done 20 calls this week, 400 emails, and yada, yada. It doesn't matter, actually. What matters is, talk to me about the quality of the deals in your pipeline and progression, which we'll get to in a moment. So here we've got 4 criteria, and we're actually inspecting it at every level, right? Is there really a deal here, early stage in the progress of our pipeline? Do we have a technical solution fit? Do we have the relationships we need? And do we really want to go after this? Because here's something that might not be obvious in enterprise. A lot of the times you're going to look at a deal and you're going to, you know what, this one's going to suck up too many resources. It's $1 million ACV, it looks really juicy, but I need 2 full-time sales engineers, I need head of product, yada, 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 and so forth. And you just might say, you know what, the probability here, the risk return is not there. So sometimes you have to pull out, which is not the case usually in velocity businesses. So how do you do this in practice? Some of you are going to be from companies that don't have a ton of resources, and they're not going to go and spend tens of thousands of dollars on a cool tool like Altify. What I've done in the past is just use custom fields in a CRM. Obviously, this one's Salesforce.com, but it doesn't really matter which it is. As a sales manager, here's what you should be inspecting for. I have a close date of 12/29. The next thing I look at is the mutual plan. If you don't have a mutual plan or a field that looks like this in your CRM today, please go away tomorrow and put one in. And it should look like this. It should be a breakdown of what's going to happen every week, right? 12/5, 12/12, 12/19, so forth and so on. Specifically what's going to happen through to getting the contract signed, because then what I can do is tie that back to the close date and see if it's realistic. It's really interesting. The first time you implement this for reps, you'll get a whole bunch of junk and garbage. They'll start by not filling it out, and then they'll realize they can't defend their close date. So get it in, make sure it's updated, and when you're doing your one-on-ones, you're scanning through the key deals, because we're doing deal level inspection, to see if this makes sense. I wrote client affirmed in there, because I want to make sure it's mutual. How do we make it mutual? We finish our meeting, we tell the client, hey, look, I've captured some next steps in the process to close here. If you don't mind, I'm going to email you this and make sure I've got it right. Do you mind replying? Do me that courtesy? Sure. When they email back, they'll either correct it or say, you've got it. And now we have accountability on behalf of the client, right? So that's what a mutual plan looks like. And then somewhere there'll be checkboxes and fields that conform to your sales methodology that'll tell you where they stand in the deal. So in this example, if you float your mouse over number 7, which is value, it'll tell the rep, do they understand our business value? What's the economic business value? And if we know what the client said about that, we can check it. And then as a sales leader, I've got a report which has got a series of red, green, oranges that tell me where the deals stand. Seems like a lot, but just remember, we're selling to enterprise. So deal values here are 100K plus. And if you don't do this, if you spread yourself too thin and you stay operating like a velocity business, you'll do a really crappy job over a whole bunch of opportunities. Which is another point I want to bring you to. If you have a rep who's underperforming, but they've got a huge pipeline, have a look at how many opportunities they're running, right? And how deep they're going in. I can make a rep much more successful by taking 60 opportunities and giving them 30, because then they do a much better job. I have this conversation probably once a month, right? And the reps usually freak out. Right? I was in New York last week with a company, and one rep totally got it, and he was completely relieved. It was an interesting conversation. I said, I'll tell you what, how about I cut your pipeline in half, take all those away, you don't have to worry about it. And the look of relief, right? And it was maturity, so he understood. So something to think about. Big pipeline doesn't always equal success. You have to understand where we are in terms of relationship mapping. Again, this is a fancy tool, but when I'm coaching people, I say, you know what, don't worry about it. You can just get it on a piece of paper, draw it out on hand, and take a photograph of it so you've got a record. I don't care. But what I need to understand is who's important in this deal. When you do your mutual plan, who are the stakeholders that matter, and then try and figure out what their relationships are. A little sneaky trick I tell everyone to do. If I'm selling to the marketing organization, and I know they have Marketo in place already, for example, and I've got an adjacent solution, I'll say, look, tell me, when you put Marketo in, can you walk me through the process and who was involved? It's much easier for them to tell you that than if I say, hey, who do I need to get involved? Because then people get defensive and go, I'm running this, you just have to talk to me. So get them to give you a practical example and then start mapping these people out. Do we do this at Velocity Deal? No, we don't do this. We don't have time. This actually takes a lot of effort. But in enterprise, it's critical. Process. We focus on deal progression rather than activity. I said earlier, I don't care how many emails an enterprise rep sent. I really don't, right? It's when they're about to go on a performance improvement plan, I might go back and have a look and say, well, look, are they actually turning up for work or have they got a second job? What I care about and what I need to be able to see is, are you moving deals through the process, which implies that you have structured sales processes that have exit milestones and criteria. So that we all know if they're in stage 3, these things have been done. I want to make a really important point here. You'll see along the top here I've got percentages. They represent progression, not probability. And in most CRMs, what happens is the probability is tied to a stage. It's wrong. It works perfectly well if I've got 100 deals, and in aggregate, I can figure out that if you're 70% through the deal, in aggregate, there's a probability that we'll get 60% of that basket of opportunities. When I'm dealing with one big deal, it makes no sense, because I could be pre-negotiation, but know that technically we've got a big problem. We've got a competitor who's beating us. So you must have a separate category, which is your forecast probability. Is it commit? Is it best case? Is it pie in the sky? Whatever you choose to use. So make sure that you're using that appropriately, and reps aren't just connecting probability to sales progression. My favorite chart. This happens to be from Insight Squared. You can get it, build it from many other BI tools, I'm sure. What you're looking at here, if we look at 100K and look along to the right, you'll see that there's a deal that was forecast for April, and it's been shunted along to July. This is enterprise sales death. And this is where you have the perennial pipeline that looks awesome. It's 5 times, 6 times, whatever it happens to be their quota, but it's the same set of deals just moving along. And most tools that we use today to manage our business, most CRMs don't snapshot and give you this. You have to be able to see it. A sneaky trick that doesn't give you the nice visuals, but will allow you to track this, you can have this one for free. Create a push counter. It's very simple. So on the opportunity record, what it does is it increments if you ever move it by a month or more. You can move it out 2 months. It's still one increment, right, because you moved it once. And if it gets to 2, then you need to have a conversation with your rep. Are they really controlling this deal? Is that mutual plan really mutual? Where are we at? Account intelligence. This is new. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it to say that this. You need to provide your reps with tools and insights to allow them to get access to the executive agenda. When I'm dealing with enterprise accounts, the biggest mistake I hear all the time is, or outcome I hear is, the budget went away. The project got killed. And that tells me straight away we weren't attached to an executive agenda. We were dealing with the mid-level managers that have budget allocated to them. What we really want to do is find out what's happening in the C-suite right now, what's important, and how can we attach to that agenda. And if they don't have an agenda that's attached to what we do, then obviously we can get into challenger mode and work to that. But we need to invest in this. And back in the day, with some of the systems integration companies, you had a really interesting model. You'd have an account director, account executive, who was typically someone in the mid to late 30s and beyond, who really understood an account and managed the relationships, and you'd have a junior account manager. And they were part of a team quota. I was one of those juniors 23 years ago, and what I got to do was learn the sales process, and part of my job was to learn how to research accounts. And with our high velocity outbound sales development model, it's kind of gone away for a lot of companies. And I think it's a shame. If you're selling to enterprise and you've got reps that need to close 5, 8 deals a year to make their number, it makes no sense to pair them with an SDR who's purely gold on getting new opportunities, is it? So this is a really good area where you can apply some learning for a new person and use their time well. What does it do if you attach to an executive agenda? It means you get much bigger deals. If you're dealing with a CFO, they've got the power to take budget that was allocated over here and give it to you. That's enterprise selling. So how do you find people that can do that? Here's my favorite enterprise sales profile. They've probably worked for a large company themselves. Why is that important? Because they understand politics. They understand that you can't get a deal done in a month. They understand that you can't trust the person you're talking to. They know what happy ears is. You know what anyone heard of happy ears before? You have, right? For those of you who haven't, it's the rep who comes back and goes, boss, 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 I just had this great meeting. It was amazing. We're going to close next week. He totally gets it, right? But if we did our account mapping, we'd understand that what I call the lone nut, the guy in the corner who gets all excited about your new technology, which has absolutely no chance of getting anywhere in their large behemoth organization. So having somebody who's worked for a big company, they get it, right? They understand. And they understand the language. They understand that there's a procurement function, that there's legal, there's a chief risk officer, et cetera, and so on. The second thing is super handy to have domain knowledge. I don't think it's critical when you're starting out, and in particular if you're in an established industry and you've got great enablement, you can train them. But if you're not, having that domain knowledge is critical because you've got the glossary of terms. In particular, if I've got a new technology that an industry's not working, I have to have some credibility. I work with a company at the moment that sells IoT for buildings, right? And that's an industry that's used to having devices stuck here that control the lights and manage the HVAC and all that sort of carry on. And their stuff's in the cloud. So if you get a person coming in trying to sell to the 55-year-old facilities manager who's been doing the same thing the same way for 25 years, and you don't intimately understand their role and how the ecosystem fits together, they won't be successful. And the last thing is, critical for me, finance. If you're going to sell to executives, you've got to understand the language of finance. They've got to know their NPVs, their IRRs, they've got to know what a hurdle rate is so that they can ask this, they can build a compelling business case. If they don't, they'll get trumped by the kid from Oracle who's been doing this for 5 years and has got the MBA and all that good stuff. So those three things for me are critical. The last one, a little bit controversial in the Valley, right? What we can get away with in terms of inside sales or dealing with cool companies in the Valley doesn't translate when you get to big enterprise, particularly if you're selling in places like New York. So pictures here, people I happen to know. So if you're selling to the executive on the right, you probably want to look like one of the people in the middle. The point I'll make there is that people like them, right? We're hardwired that way, right? If you're completely different to me, my amygdala tells me, be scared of this and put your defenses up and put a block up. So as much as we want to be cool kids and wear hoodies and sell in t-shirts, I have a specific example from last week where CEO told me that he got a phone call from a guy he knew at a prospect who had invited them in, and he said, hey, don't ever send X to our company again. Turned up in one of your polo t-shirts, we're a bank, man, right? So, I mean, you know, classic example, this stuff happens all the time. So we need to think about that. And an important point for executives is the last section of this sentence. They need to know now. If it's not on the executive agenda for 2017, you're not going to get their time. They're booked up for weeks in advance. They don't have free time to chit-chat and talk about stuff we might be in 2018. It has to be relevant now, and how do I know that? I know that because I did all the account research earlier, and I'm attaching to that executive agenda. Other thing that might catch you by surprise, it's pretty scary when you have to face your first RFP and get in the middle of a proper procurement process. It's complicated. If you don't have somebody within your organization who's done it before, it can help you articulate a process, bring a team together, coordinate the sections of the thing where you've got engineering, you've got product, you've got probably marketing to help with messaging and whatnot. You need to get that advice and bring it in-house, because then you get to the contract side of it and you get really juicy things like this, termination for convenience clauses. And they tell you that they don't do business with anyone unless there's a termination for convenience clause. This is an excerpt from a real email, not so long ago, as you can see. So on the single email, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 people in procurement lined up against this poor AE who's trying to sell them, right? They don't stand a bloody chance unless they've got the support of a team around them and we have some proposal management process, all right? So how do we pay these people? So this is really important. Everyone talks about having monthly quotas, increases velocity and all that good stuff. It doesn't make sense to have a monthly quota if it takes me 9 months or 12 months to sell a deal. Never makes sense, right? So as you move to quarterly or annual quotas, or sales cycles, you need to align your quota periods to that. But also you need to keep people motivated. And the reason I like this picture is got that ladders holding it up. You need to think about quarterly consistency bonuses. I've seen quarterly consistency bonus when you've got a monthly quota, and that just blows my mind. The reason that you have a quarterly consistency bonus is you've got someone who's running to an annual target, and you don't want them to hockey stick it at the end of the year. So you put it in to make sure that they drive really hard to have a great Q1, to hit that number, which is their year-to-date number, and Q2 and Q3, because that's what we want. We want consistency and predictability for the venture community. So think about that. Plans need to be simple and understood. I don't know if any of you have seen this. This is a recent one, right? And this is because someone interpreted the plan differently. So don't have 15 different levers. Have as few levers as you can. It gets very tempting to put in things like cash paid up front, annual contract value, total contract value, and then products, kickers, and all this, but it gets out of hand very quickly. So keep it as simple as you can, meaning making sure in the meantime that you're aligning the behavior of the rep and their incentives to the company goals. A last point I want to make, you do need to change the culture. If I'm selling to enterprise and I'm not getting notches in my belt for 6 months at a time, that can be draining. right? Some people say that reps are either coin-operated or flattery-operated. I'm not sure if it's true, but what I will say is they're human, and they need to feel like there's something they're striving for that's worth getting. So as you go up market, it may be that you're not dropping $100,000 on a club trip to Maui, but you need something. You need something for them to feel proud about, so they go, this is worth it. Because if it's money alone, it doesn't cut it, right? It really doesn't. You've got to find those incentives that hit them at a personal level that'll get them through, and a culture that makes them proud to be a part of. So those are all the learnings. I've hit 20 minutes, but Max, who organized this thing, asked me to share something with you, which is something I'm doing right now. So we are running a Sales Ops Central where I work. We're running a sales management frontline boot camp. It's a 2-day boot camp. We're doing it tomorrow, actually, the first one here, where we teach SaaS sales managers all the stuff they need to know they don't get taught. Unless you're working at a very large organization like Salesforce that has a sales leadership program, you're kind of screwed. So I brought together a bunch of great people, the guy who was EVP of Strategy and Operations at Salesforce, Doug Landers, who was Head of Enablement Productivity at Box, and we created a curriculum. So if you're interested, check out salesopscentral.com, and that's there. I hope you got some takeaways.